It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Monday, May 22nd, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is getting ready for goalie week. Russ, we're talking goalies all
I
week,
I know it's hard. It's difficult to talk about goalies.
but it's a lot of fun. We're going to talk about the Flyers goalies today and some draft eligible goalies later in the week. Plus, it's Monday, so we'll have our Nemesis all on today's show.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there. Thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on Twitter at Sportsology. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. You can subscribe or follow us for free over on YouTube. We're now on the Sirius XM app. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, you'll get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Russ, before we get into the goalie talk, I want to just touch briefly on the Kyle Dubas situation
Mhm.
in Toronto, just simply because, first off, that was an absolute debacle, how everything went down, which seems very Toronto to me. But also, I just find it interesting, want to question the Flyers in their hiring process. Now, there are pros and cons in terms of the timing of the hire relative to the draft and free agency and all of that. We talked about that and how important it was to lock that team in place. But also, there's the were they missing out on a conversation with Kyle Dubas because apparently he's in the mix in Pittsburgh now.
Well, all right. So first thing is, I did mention, and we did mention that he could be, a guy the Flyers could talk to because we thought he could shake loose. Weren't sure if it was going to happen. Okay, so it's happened. In Pittsburgh, I don't think he's going to go there because I think he's going to want to have his own coach, probably even Sheldon Keefe again. And I think that Ottawa ownership group that seems to like him, if they get in there, they could install him and Keefe in a heartbeat, and that would be
True.
easy. If he goes to Pittsburgh, is he really going to try and oust Mike Sullivan? No. Is Mike Sullivan he going to get along? I don't know. Like that's the biggest if. So I don't necessarily see it there. But the one thing I did think for sure, because I thought about this like with a good friend or a best friend, if you noticed, Kyle Dubas never had to fire Sheldon Keefe. I don't think he wanted to. And maybe that was part of the autonomy. I still think it was. I still think he did not want to fire him and did not want to have to take a job to fire him, like, take an extension to do it. So maybe that's why he
Right.
wanted that extra autonomy so he could let Keefe live out his contract and give him one more year. And clearly all that didn't work out.
Yeah, it's all very interesting. We'll see what happens in Pittsburgh and in Toronto moving forward. I did mention this on Twitter, but I feel like Brendan Shanahan has aged about 10 years in the last 6 months
Except his
because,
glasses. He had really nice glasses.
yeah, that is true. In Worlds right now, not including the Sunday games, which were a little bit later than recording, Scott Laughton is doing okay for Team Canada, a goal and 2 assists in
Mhm.
the tournament so far. He's been the 2C, and he's taking a ton of faceoffs. So I actually think that's good in terms of, getting more practice
Yeah.
under his belt at center. So I appreciate that in terms of what the experience has been for him.
Plus, with the Flyers center situation, you never know if he's going to have to go back. Like if
Yeah.
Couturier can't finish out the year or something. So it's good for him to do that.
Yeah, I think so too. Carter Gauthier is getting a lot of eyes on him at this tournament,
Mhm.
mostly because he's just taking a ton of shots on goal. We mentioned
Right.
this the last time, but he did get a goal versus Denmark in that 3-0 shutout. He's got 3 goals in 5 games played before the game against France, and he's really showing very well there. So I'm very pleased about that. And if nothing else, he'll go back into his next season in college with a little bit more confidence and feel like with those younger USA stars coming on to Boston College with him, he'll be a good part of that mix.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely give him confidence. I think it'll be harder to score in college than on Denmark, but anyhow.
Well, I don't know. Denmark was pretty tough, so it took them a while to get on the board. But that being said, let's switch over to the Flyers goalie situation as opposed to Team Denmark. But yeah, it's such a quandary, I think, for the Flyers because obviously Carter Hart is your number one goaltender here, and we do have a question in the number 2 slot or the 1B slot, however you want to term it. But all 3 of the goaltenders in the mix here have 1 more year on their contracts. And without it being staggered, I find that adds an extra layer of challenge for the Flyers in making decisions.
It does. I mean, and this is a bad year for the goalie market. So it's good that they could get through this year, but without the thing from Hockey Canada being settled, you do wonder if that's going to stop the Flyers from offering Carter Hart like an extension over the summer. It might. I've had people tell me they think it would. So then you're going to kind of roll into next year and hope that at some point they'll have a conversation if everything works out during the year, at the end of the year. I mean, it's a little iffy. I don't know exactly how it's going to go. I mean, he's got 1 more year and then I think 1 more RFA year, right? So yeah. So they do need to find out if he wants to stay for sure, because if not, then maybe at that deadline you do have to trade him. So you don't want to. So if he does say he wants to stay, then they have to decide about the other thing that I talked about. I think he's going to end up staying. That's just my gut feeling, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I think it's nothing's ever 100%, right? No. In this game, but I think chances are very high that Carter Hart sticks around with the Flyers. In terms of looking at this past season and judging goaltending and to figure out what an appropriate contract extension would look like for Carter Hart or for Sam Ersson at this point, if that's something they decide they want to do. He's got 1 more year at the $859K level. And so would they offer an extension to him earlier? But to me, you can't do that without locking up Carter Hart first. And
right.
So I think in terms of looking at this past season to kind of gauge, how to evaluate these goaltenders, just looking at the play in front of them, I mean, you do have to kind of put little asterisks next to their numbers, right?
Yeah, no question. I think Briere knows what Hart is and knows what the Flyers defense is. He's played enough to know that. So I don't think that's going to necessarily count against him. He was durable enough. They played him 55 games. I'd like to see him play him a little less, but that's okay. And he did that. So, his age is right. You could give him an 8-year deal if you had to, and still only 32 at the end of it. So all of that would check out. Now, he may only want 4 or 5 because he may not fully believe in the rebuild and wants to see for himself and then get another kick at the can. So, that's another, that's another situation that we won't know how it's going to work out. As far as Ersson goes, it doesn't even matter what we think, Rachel. Like, Torch just likes him. I feel bad for Sandstrom because I just don't feel like he's going to get the shot. I feel like they played him in games that they, had to play him because Ersson was getting played too much. And I just feel like this wasn't like the ideal way for him to kind of get shown in this league. Sometimes you can't help it. Sometimes it's not perfect. And so I just look at it and say, seems like he's just going to be gone. I don't think now, whether they keep Nolan Mayer around and he's down in Lehigh as an insurance policy, that may happen. But I could see them bringing in another goalie, just, to have him at Lehigh, but maybe on a 2-way deal just in case something happens at the NHL level.
Yeah, well, we're going to dig more into, the top 3 goalie stats and talk more about what next year could look like for the Flyers and the Phantoms coming up next. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your favorite sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They've got killer deals on last minute tickets, and with their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting excited for the fun you'll have. My favorite part of the Gametime app is it's great for getting those notifications about last minute tickets and their flash deals. Plus, you can get those all important view from your seats. The Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Also, the tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you'll never have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account, redeem that code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Continuing our goalie week discussions. Of course, today we're talking about the existing Flyers goaltending starting tomorrow and a little bit later this week. We're going to dig into all the top draft eligible goaltenders in this year's draft. We're going to cover a whole bunch of guys, including Trey Augustine, who we've talked about on the U.S. national team, a legacy second generation goalie in Ewan Hue, and a lot more. So look forward to that later this week. Looking at Carter Hart's season in review, he got off to a really good start this season. Everybody was like, oh, Carter Hart's back. We don't have to worry about him anymore. He did level out a bit. And also the Flyers play in front of him, like we talked about in the last segment, wasn't, top of the charts for the whole season. And so, we do have to, again, consider that in the way that we're talking about them. But I do think it's important to look at the goalies in the context of their performance compared to other goalies across the league.
No question, you have to look at the goalies that way. Matching them up against the league is actually the smart way to do it, because at the end of the day, whether your team was above or below the average line, you put them up against their peers. That is the best way to tell, and I agree with that.
Yeah, so if you look at Carter Hart, compared to other goalies, just filtering for goalies that played 500 or more minutes in the season, he was 20th overall in save percentage, 26th in goals against average. And despite the fact that he overall had a better season than last year, I think those numbers are kind of on the margins there, like really small difference when everything, played out by the end of the season. And so really, I think you want him to be somewhere of like 5 to 10 spots higher in those stats is where you want to consider yourself having a solid goaltender that's going to keep you in more games and that is going to carry you through and be able to put good games together when you need it.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Hockey Reference quality starts 24, I might agree with that, because there were some starts where he wasn't all there, like he had some bad games. There's no question he had some bad games this year, even aside from the team, just himself. But again, I still tell people at 24, he could still get better. Like I've seen goalies do it at 25, 26. You look at Devin Dubnyk is a good example. So there is still that fact in there for goalies. When you look at, his GSAA is good. It could be better, but it shows that, he is worth something to the team. You look at the difference of his and maybe what Felix Sandstrom's is, and they're in the opposite direction. So, that checks out.
And the goals saved above average is GSAA, just in case anybody didn't know what that stat is. He was in the negative for the previous 2 seasons and bounced back to be in the positive at 4.4 this season, and that is very good.
Yeah, and I think that's it's good that you talked about the improvement. I look at the number as it is, and I say that's good. Could still be better, but that is good. So at the end of the day, I mean, I'm only quibbling about maybe how many games he played, but otherwise, two shutouts. I mean, it wasn't easy to get shutouts with this team. So did well. Did better in the early part of the season. Definitely had a midpoint of the season where he wasn't as good, and then I do feel like he finished pretty strong.
Yeah, I do think you also have to look at how Tortorella managed the goaltenders,
Hmm.
because I do feel like sometimes he did not put his goalies in the best position to succeed in terms of which starts, which days they were giving off. When there was a back-to-back, maybe I would have switched who started in those back-to-backs. And
Well, do we
so
blame John or do we blame Kim Dillabaugh? I guess we probably should blame Dillabaugh just simply because John's always telling us he's kind of hands off with the goalies, and they go with the goalie coach. And so I know that coach can make the overriding decision. I would say maybe only once or twice this year I felt like Torts made the overriding decision, maybe to keep Ersan in there an extra game. I feel like, but
yeah.
otherwise, I feel like it was mostly Dillabaugh.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Whoever's making the decision, I feel like there were some maybe better decisions that could have been made in goalie deployment this year. So I think all things being equal, and you put all of this together and what the Flyers were, I'm very pleased with Carter Hart's season overall, and think that whatever happens with him and his contract, um, remains to be seen. But I would be very happy to see him stay with the Flyers moving forward. And again, you just want to see that marginal improvement next season. Now, with what team might be in front of him next season, that's a question mark in terms of how that will help or potentially hurt him in that process. But I do think he's up for the challenge. I think he has a really good attitude, and
Hmm.
the way he takes care of his mental health is important. But I think that who's in the number 2 spot and how they use them is going to be very important for Carter Hart's next season to keep him afloat if defensively the Flyers are not as good next year as they were this year. And I say not as good, recognizing that good is a relative term.
Right.
But yeah.
No, I agree with you.
So looking at Felix Sandstrom and Sam Ersson, in that same filtering of looking at goalies with 500 or more minutes played, Sam Ersson was about 10 positions higher than Felix Sandstrom in those rankings. So he wound up 55th in save percentage and 57th in goals against average. And I think, that's at the bottom of your backup goalie tier, right? So
Yes.
again, you want to see your 1B or your backup be, in the at least the second third of those backup goalies, and they're not there yet. Neither Sandstrom nor Erson were there. And in fact,
No.
Sandstrom was below that into a kind of third tier, which is not something you want to see either. But at least Sam Ersson was in the backup goalie like position in terms of rankings.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. I thought there'd be more distance between him and Sandstrom. That surprised me. I also
Mhm.
feel like he kind of got thrown into it before he was, like you said, ready anyhow. So it was like a learning year. So I think he can improve on that. He does have a long way to go to be like a true 1B where, you're going to say, all right, we're not going to worry about Carter Hart because we got Ersan in there. There's a lot of time for that. I know the coach probably feels that that's the case already, but I'm not there yet.
Yeah, and it's also a question because he thrives on playing a lot, Erson does,
Yes.
but also he got overplayed
Oh, yeah.
with the Flyers, but more so with the Phantoms, just got completely overplayed. And so, I think that there's going to have to be attention paid to that, to scale that back a little bit. And maybe that's how you get the best out of Sam Ersson, is let him play, more than you would other backup goalies, but not so much that it's going to wipe him out.
Right. I think Ersan needs to talk to some older goalies that used to play like 65, 70 games just to kind of get a feel for the pacing of things and and how it might turn out if all of a sudden your other goalie gets hurt and you got to start playing a lot of games in a row. I just don't feel like he's prepared for that mentally, and I think somebody needs to work with him on that. Just because, again, it hasn't come up in his career.
Yeah, exactly. But it also begs the question, if they trade Felix Sandstrom, A, what could they even get in return for him? And B, who's your top Phantoms goaltender who's available for a call up?
Yeah, well, and that's why maybe you don't trade him right away, but I do think he is going to get traded. So I do think, I think while Noel Mayer had a decent year, some were kind of not thrilled with his playoffs. Okay, I mean, he's just getting used to it too. He's also like a 24-year-old goalie. So I think they'll bring in somebody else with the Phantoms for that situation. Whether it's like the Rangers had Louis Domingue as an example, that kind of guy.
Right.
I think they will have somebody like that. But Sandstrom, I don't think will be a Flyer too much longer.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but I think it's going to be an interesting question for management to answer over the next little bit. And do they resolve it around the draft in a trade or around free agency, or do they wait until camp to figure it out? That is something that a lot of eyes are going to be on as the off season continues.
Yeah, maybe it's like a 7th round pick with a condition, or maybe he gets thrown in a deal.
Yeah, I think that's possible as well. But again, I think it's important to figure out who that third goaltender is going to be that you can rely on for the Phantoms and for call-ups.
Yeah, that's going to be something I think that they look at in free agency.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, we will finish up as we do each and every Monday with our Nemesis of the week coming up next. All right, so if you are newer to Locked On Flyers, each and every Monday we look around the world of hockey and we talk about who or what our nemesis is, especially for the Flyers. And last week I talked a lot about patience in terms of the expectations being set that this rebuild is going to be a longer thing and will take time. And they said that over and over again. So maintaining that patience was very challenging for me personally, but we're gonna go with it and see what Keith Jones and Danny Briere have in store. And that's what leads me to this week's nemesis for me, is waiting for that all important first move. And what is it going to be? Like, what is this new regime's first stamp on this team going to be as a group and as a team? And
one more dollar dog night, Rachel. That's going to be the new stand.
Well, you know what I mean, with player moves and stuff. But is it a contract they're going to sign? Is it a trade they're going to make? Are we going to have to wait until the draft for that? And so I think, what is going to set the tone for this Flyers management team is going to be very important, because I think a lot of people are going to judge them on this first move. Like, what are they going to do out of the gate here to make an impression on the fan base, to say they're serious and they show that they know what the steps are and what the order should be in accomplishing them?
Yeah, I think that's fair. My nemesis is going to be I know Keith Jones said he likes the Carolina Hurricanes defense, and then, likes the structure of it and everything. And I know fans are looking at that saying, yeah, that would be great. You go look at how long it took them to get that structure together and get that just right. And you're talking probably 4 years just for that.
Yep.
Based on obtaining talent, just based on where contracts are right now, where you are in the draft. This isn't the best defensive draft. All those things.
Figuring out the right combination of guys and the right minutes. And
Yeah, this is not something that happens in the next year or two, I don't think. I think that's going to, again, look at the New York Rangers. They don't even have it right. And they're a much better team, but they don't have it right. So that's my nemesis. It's like, don't look at that. I know it's nice to say that, hey, that's something you want to aspire to. That's great. But you're talking about the best defense in the league. Maybe you should aspire to be like, maybe like one of the 10 best. And that's something maybe that they could actually achieve. To actually be the best defense in the league, I'm not sure they'll ever achieve that. I mean, again, if you want to be the best defense in the league, you have to have someone like a Haskin in the draft, or Adam Fox, or somebody like that, where, and look, the Rangers have Adam Fox and they're not the best defense in the league, but I'm just giving you examples of the super high end offensive defenseman talent that just isn't in this draft. And so like, you don't have it in your organization. You don't have it in the draft. Most of those guys don't get traded. You might get one of those guys in their 30s and it helps you, but it doesn't usually make you the best. So you have to look at it that way and say, all right, I understand here. It's a long shot.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, especially, we talk about the NHL being a copycat league. You can't look at exactly what Carolina does. You can say, yes, they have a very good defense, and we can take some hints from that. Or we can look at it, to your point, of how long it takes to put a defense together like that. But I think it's important to really look at the situation your team is in and build from the ground up there, and
Yes.
you can't match something elsewhere, because players are individual. They're all different, right? And so you're never going to get
Yeah.
the same thing. And so you have to do what works for you within the time, in the context of, what are you doing with your forwards? What are you doing with your goalies? Like, it all has
No,
to
you make
fit
and you
in
make
at
a
the
good
same
point.
time.
And you make a good point, because even if you want to say, well, we want similar structure, well, you base that structure based on these individual players' talents, and
Right.
it's going to be different with the Flyers too.
Yeah. So I think you just have to do it your own way. And I think that, again, with my Nemesis this week, what is that first move going to be? I am eagerly awaiting that. Wrapping up with our Flyers fun thing, Cutter Gauthier had a really nice power play goal at Worlds. And so there's a link to that in the show notes. Get you excited about him joining the Flyers down the road. Every day is tomorrow on the show. Like I said, we're going to look at the draft eligible goalies. We're going to start with a few of them. We'll have more of them later this week, and where we think the Flyers should consider a goalie in the draft in terms of the picks they have. Very important part of that process. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So send in your mailbag questions via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com, or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Have a great day, everyone.